You're listening to Opera Box Score.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Wherever you are, however you're listening, it's America's talk radio show about opera. It's Opera Box Score. I'm Weston Williams, joined by Oliver Camacho and Matt Cummings. All right, this week we go inside the huddle with Key'mon Murrah. In advance of his upcoming Washington National Opera Marian Anderson Vocal Award recital, we catch up with the in-demand countertenor after almost 4 years since he first became a friend of the show. Then we take a break from the opera to discuss the CSO in this week's listener mailbag. After that, Puccini died a century ago, but his operas are still performed all over the world. Matt and I are here to settle the question once and for all. Was Giacomo the GOAT? Or GioAT, if you will. Plus, in the 2-minute drill, is Bayreuth's budget going bust? Will bad business bring about bankruptcy? We boys break down this baffling botheration. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, click follow. On Apple Podcasts, hit the plus sign. Email us your hot takes by writing to mailbag at operaboxscore.com or upload a voice memo using the You Got Something to Say tab on our website, operaboxscore.com. However you contribute, you'll get an OBS beer coaster, an OBS lapel pin, and a #1 OBS fan foam finger just for sharing your own hot take. And without further ado, Matt Cummings, it's very clear by the quality of that opening script that you and I are taking the reins on this one.
Yes. I mean, a joke that made me roll my eyes so much that you started laughing. A line delivery that sounded right out of the New Republic City dispatches from Legend of Korra. Alliteration.
I mean, I'm nothing if not on brand. And, you know, it's been a while since have we ever done an episode just the two of us?
Not a full episode, I don't think. I'm pretty sure that you and I had a little tete-a-tete for the most iconic Mother's Day episode of all time about Elektra.
That is also very on brand of us.
Yes. Being a little head.
I'll have to bleep that one. That's just how we roll. We're the bad boys of the OBS. So let's talk some opera.
Huddle up. Let's go inside the huddle.
Praised by Opera News for his resplendent, voluptuous tone, friend of the show Key'mon Murrah is the 2024 Marian Anderson Vocal Award winner, who will give his Kennedy Center recital with pianist Brian Ziegler on December 17th.
We last spoke to Key'mon at the start of 2021, which would prove to be a banner year for the in-demand countertenor, including having won both the Houston Grand Opera Arias Competition and NIOP International Vocal Competition, making his debut with Seattle Opera in the title role of Gluck's Orfeo, and receiving the Encouragement Award as an Operalia finalist.
That is quite an OBS bump, if I do say so myself. Before Key'mon goes inside the huddle with Oliver, here are some of his performances from the 2021 Operalia finals. This is the cabaletta of Arsace's entrance aria from Rossini's Semiramide.
From the 2021 Operalia Finals concert. Wow. That was our guest, Key'mon Murrah, singing Arsace's cavatina and cabaletta. We just heard the cabaletta. And I think that was when really a lot of people heard you for the first time. I mean, like, we've been talking about you for years now, but I feel like that was when, like, suddenly you were this entity that many, many, many people became aware of. Would you say that's right?
I would say so too.
And that sort of capped off a year of you just entering a lot of competitions. I mean, we spoke, I think, in February of that year before all of this stuff started to come down. But you also won the Giulio Gari competition that year. And the Giulio Gari competition are friends of the show. But yeah, I feel like this was the start of your story. Oh, you did Houston that year, right? The Houston Arias.
Mm-hmm.
Was that, yeah. So like here you are, this like singer who sort of emerged as this, you know, very high quality countertenor / counter soprano voice. And you didn't have a lot of opera experience under your belt yet. You had some, but you just did the competition circuit. And do you feel like that's what led to all these contracts that started coming your way?
Yeah, I knew it was going to be really hard for me starting out. Like you said, I didn't have a lot of opera experience. I didn't come from a big young artist program and any of that. So I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm 28. I have to get myself out there. So I did as many competitions as I could. And especially it was during the pandemic. So I wasn't working as much. So it was another way for my income that year too.
Can you say which competition really introduced you to the people or the person or the people that got you to the next stage? Was it Operalia?
I think it was a combination. I think Operalia let the world know who I am. I think it was a mix between the Belvedere competition and NIOP, who actually got me work.
I feel like Operalia is a competition for people who already have careers happening. And like, it just gives them sort of exposure. But I was so thrilled to see you in Operalia because I knew where you were in your career. And it was like, okay, well, this guy got through without really having that much experience. It really does mean that these competitions can be purer than we think they are. I mean, I think a lot of us think it's so political about who you know, but you really got in on the basis of your singing.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think NIOP and Belvedere are a lot more realistic for people. It's less higher profile than Operalia.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really something to for singers that are listening. Yes, you know, this is something that you should focus on and you should prepare for and do your best in. Can you say which job was the first contract that came out of this competition year?
I think my first job was Seattle Opera.
Oh, well, the Orfeo. That's a title role.
That was a title role. Not a lot. I only think I had 3 opera roles, that I've done before then. So very nervous, but it was very fulfilling.
And then not long after, you had the Detroit contract, right? Okay. So this all leads to what I think of is your banner season so far. I know you will have many like banner seasons, but last year was insane for you. I mean, you did The Sorcerer in Munich from Dido and Aeneas. You reprised this role in Gabriel Elena Frank's Último Sueño de Frida y Diego. And I remember seeing this little Instagram clip. It's not even like 30 seconds long, but like, was it you and Daniela Mack where
yes,
you were exchanging phrases and you just sort of like, wait a second, let me sing it. It's so good. And you did that in LA. And then, of course, there's the Met debut in El Nino. And then you capped off the season with singing Ptolomeo in St. Louis. And in a way, like St. Louis is sort of small potatoes compared to all those other things you did. But we love Opera Theatre St. Louis. And I really felt like, that was such a big role for you and the audience went crazy for it. Can you just talk about this year and like how you took it all in and how you organized yourself and how you prepared? I mean, I felt like that was a lot for you to have all that music memorized.
Amen. And when I first started my, actually doing these bigger roles, I didn't think that I had that much of a problem with memorizing
Uh-huh.
Until I had this load on me. I was just pushed out there. So the year prior to the St. Louis and everything, I had 3 roles back to back. And I learned from them that I think I did fine, but I learned then that I need to prepare a lot earlier, months in advance. And I think that's what helped me with this last year and allowed me to be a lot more free on the stage. I could experiment, I could play with the character more because I'd done all of that work well prior to.
Is there a venue? So you did St. Louis, Munich, Los Angeles, the Met. Is there a venue where you felt like people really got it and like they were very excited to hear you and wanted to like meet you and like learn more? Because I'm just wondering, I mean, this is sort of my secret intention for this question is to find out if you felt that maybe dismissed in Munich.
No, actually, no. I think when I first got there, there was this, figuring me out, and I'm figuring them out. It was my first time singing in Munich, so I want to be on my best behavior, those things like that. But as I showed them who I was, my preparation, my work, my artistry, I really believe they began to fall in love with me. And it allowed me to sing that role a couple of more times that year. They asked me to do that. So I had a really great experience in Munich.
Good. We are in this weird time in not just the US, but really all over Western democracies where everything is getting more conservative. And I'm nervous for my friends who are like in Dresden or Vienna or something like that, where to me it feels like a lot more conservative. I know that there isn't, like microaggressions per se happening there, but I feel like the people who are conservative are much more vocal and much more powerful,
Yes, and that's very true. Going in as a Black singer, I felt a lot of eyes were on me. I felt like I had to do well, where it didn't feel like that same amount of pressure was on other people. But I'm glad that I took that because it really educated me. It really put a lot more tools in my tool belt under that pressure. So, yeah.
Is there an experience you had in the past 2 years where you felt really nurtured as opposed to where you felt like pressure to perform and be your best?
Nurtured?
Yeah, where it's like, where they realized where you were in your process and your level of experience, where they really wanted to, I don't want to say hold your hand, but like, show you the ropes where you felt like there was like, okay.
I think that was Seattle, actually.
Yeah.
It was my first time at that level of work. And Christina, the executive director or ex-executive director there, at that time, everybody really make sure that I was okay. Make sure that I was like, okay, he's getting his bearings. He's there. He's getting there. And make sure I was good. So I really felt nurtured at Seattle Opera.
And then was it like, I mean, I hear stories about the Met and they're doing so many productions simultaneously. Did you feel like there was no time for anybody to like be whatever nurtured at a place like the Met?
Yes and no. I think everybody, I believe that we all think that the Met is a very hard place. It's a very strict place. It's that, but I felt a lot of love there. I felt a lot of encouragement. I felt seen and I felt wanted there. So that was my experience. And I felt like at that time I didn't need a lot of nurturing. I think I got what I needed. And I felt like I showed up and did what I needed to do.
Do you have anybody that is traveling with you, like your manager at, was it L2? I should know the name of this guy. L2 artists. Do you have anybody who's going out there and listening for you so you know how your voice is being heard in the hall and like what you might need to adjust? I don't know if you have a lot of like options these days because like your voice is your voice, but like these are all very different venues and yeah. If I don't know if you have like your brother even like who says, okay, you need to do more of this,
Most of the time, if he's available, my brother or my boyfriend will be around, and they'll tell me, it was like, oh, fix this. Oh, we need to hear you more in this area. And so, oh, that's perfect. I'm glad they're able to do that. But most of the time, it's just me. And a lot of the time, if I'm on the stage during rehearsal, I get my handy little phone
Hmm.
and put it right out in the middle of the house and see if I can hear myself with the orchestra. And that helps me understand if I'm being heard, if you can understand my diction, all of that. So having that recorder really helps me.
Of all the spaces that you've sung in so far, is there one that feels the most flattering to your voice?
Um, I really liked singing in Munich.
Yeah.
I really liked on that stage. I felt like I didn't have to do much. I didn't have to push. I didn't. It was a really nice experience.
Are there any plans to continue to sing in Munich?
Not yet, but I hopefully I hopefully they'll keep me in their mind.
So can you tell us how you got this Marian Anderson award, having not actually sung on the stage of Washington National Opera? It seems a little bit, well, I'm glad that you're getting it, but it just seems like, how did this happen exactly? How did they find you?
I'm still asking that as well. It's it's to me, it's early in my career.
Yeah.
But I'm still figuring that out as well. I think that I try my best, and I think people are seeing that, and I'm guessing that's why I'm being recognized. But I'm very happy that they chose me.
You were beginning to tell me before we started recording that you sort of know Francesca Zambello.
Yeah,
So maybe she was like on a committee or something like that.
maybe. So I don't know who that committee is, but I know that I used to work for her at Glimmerglass as a development intern. And then a couple of years later, I became a young artist at Glimmerglass. But that was during the pandemic. So I'm guessing she just kept her eye on me for a while and just saw my progression.
So this is going to air the Thursday before your concert. Is there something you'd like to? I mean, not all of us can get there, unfortunately, but like, how are you thinking about this program? What opportunity do you see for it to like brand yourself, but also to maybe push yourself? I don't know what repertoire you're singing at. I don't know if the program is already. I'm sure the program is set by now. So,
Like you said, I love early music. Love it. We'll be singing it till my voice gives out. But I also want to explore other rep. I want to explore classical romantic rep. So the recital is going to start with Rossini and Handel, and then it's going to go to Strauss, and then modern music, some Ricky and Gordon, a new piece that was written with me in mind by Melina Choi, and some spirituals. So it's going to be a little bit of everything. Yeah, and it's going to be really fun. So it's pushing me vocally, which I love. I always love learning something more about my voice and what I can do. And I'm really excited to present this music to people.
with Donald Lee?
No, it will be with Brian Ziegler.
Oh, Brian Ziegler. Okay. And do you have a gown change after intermission?
I hadn't thought about that, but I might. Actually, I am going to be wearing something special, but I'm not sure if it's going to be a dual thing, but we will see.
Now that you have had a chance to work with many different levels of artists, maybe even some of your heroes, is there somebody that you've met along the way, it's in these past 4 years that we've last spoke, that you feel like this is my type of artist, or this is the type of person I could really learn from?
There's a couple of artists, because when I first started, it was voice, 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 voice. But now it's more about artistry. Now it's about how can I connect with character more? How can I play on the stage? How can I do more of that? And right now, the people that I'm really looking up to is Joyce DiDonato, Auntie. She really lit that spark in me. So I'm looking at everything that she does. How does she learn a new new role and put herself into the character, and how is that showing onto the stage. And also when I worked with um, Julia
Oh, Julia Bullock.
when I worked with her and how she was able to connect with her character and make a piece that's basically an oratorio.
Oh, you're talking about El Nino now.
Yeah, how to take this character in El Nino and actually create an arc for this character, which is multiple characters put into one. And I thought that was really amazing.
My final question to you is, now that you have done a lot of Baroque operas, or at least a handful of them, do you feel that Baroque operas work best when they're interpreted for modern audiences, or do they work best when they are more traditional and stick to lining up with the music and not so much fighting the music?
I think that opera needs to relate to the people that's looking at it, to its audience. And it doesn't necessarily have to be put in a modern era. But as long as the audience can get the understanding, the moral understanding of the piece, that's all that matters. But it's easier to do that when it relates to that audience. So I think a little bit of both.
Because you have a lot of, fans, and I'm sure family that come to attend. Has there been a show that you've done where they're like, yeah, I really love that show. I really felt that I got that, as opposed to like the Frida and Diego thing, I feel is a little bit out there. Let's take away aficionados and fans of opera, and let's just talk about like people that you know in your life that are outside of music that have come to support you. What was the show that they most related to and most appreciated?
I think it's I think out of all of the roles that I've done, it would be three. It would be Frida y Diego, Ptolomeo at St. Louis, and Orfeo. Starting out, I think Orfeo was more of a here I am type of moment. I think over media and worldwide, I was introduced with Frida, and I think a lot of people liked that. And it was something different. It was, I was in drag. I was hitting notes and making sounds that not a normal countertenor they would hear from. And what was that other one? Ptolomeo. I think Ptolomeo is at a point where it was the first role that I was able to reprise that I've done like a few years ago. And I was able to create my own version of Ptolomeo and not do a version that most people have done before. And I think people really liked that way. Yeah.
Because you're about to do one of my favorite rarities, Mitridate, the early Mozart piece. And I've been listening to this thing since I was like 15, but I've never seen it staged. And I know it's kind of long too. And I wonder, how your fans are going to react to like, oh my God, what is this opera? It's like 30 da capo arias or like whatever. I mean, Handel operas are like that too, but it's sort of a long song and you're a villain again.
Which,
oh no, you're singing Si Fade.
Yeah, I'm singing.
Oh, you're not singing Farnace. Okay, never mind.
No. So I am walking into my soprano era.
Yeah. I
know that I've always had this capability of it, but I needed to work on my voice for it to get there. So, and this role is going to be one of the most difficult technically that I will be doing. After some recit, my first aria starts on an F and it goes to a B flat.
And some staccato notes and stuff like that, yeah.
Yeah, like the first phrase. So, and it kind of like sits up there the whole time.
Yeah.
But I think I'm ready for it. It's going to be so exciting. A little nerve-wracking and challenging.
That duet is nuts. The coloratura and that duet is nuts.
It is. It is.
But that's going to be a lot of in the practice room with her, working out all this.
Very true.
Key'mon, it's really been thrilling for us to watch you go. I mean, I in no way can take credit for it, but it's like, I just knew it when I heard you for the first time. Like, okay, this is world-class instrument here. And I'm just so glad that everybody agrees.
Oh, no, but thank you so much, Oliver. You, from the very beginning, have been a great supporter and great friend. Thank you so much.
A 2023 performance of Vivaldi's Agitata da Due Venti with Bourbon Baroque, led from the harpsichord by John Austin Clark. We'll link both the Rossini and the Vivaldi performances on the webpage for this episode at operaboxscore.com. Our thanks to returning champ Key'mon Murrah. Once again, his Kennedy Center recital as the Marian Anderson Vocal Award winner, presented by Washington National Opera, is on December 17th.
Yeah, you got something to say? Then yeah, all right, you can say something. This is listener mailbag.
That's right, we have a very special listener mailbag for two reasons. The first reason, of course, is that this listener, in addition to sending us their hot take, also donated to make sure that we keep things running around here. If you also want to donate and let us know what you think about the show, please do go to operaboxscore.com. Join David in his noble pursuit of giving us money. And it's also special for a second reason as well, because David is a fairly recent listener, coming in because of a concert that I actually did the pre-concert talk for at the Chicago Symphony Orchestra not too long ago.
Pretty cushy gig.
Pretty cushy gig, yeah. The concert included a lot of dance music, but highlighted the Megalopolis Suite, which was a CSO commission from the composer who I'm a huge fan of, Osvaldo Golihov. Megalopolis itself is maybe more controversially taken.
You wouldn't describe yourself as a huge fan of Megalopolis?
I mean, I do like weird stuff, so like
this anti-Italianic slander against Francis Ford Coppola won't stand, Weston.
I don't dislike it, which is sort of on brand for me. But David says Weston might remember my daughter Jessica approaching him for an autograph after the CSO pre-show summary. It is proudly posted on her wall. Thank you so much, Jessica. I'm really flattered. David says he does have a complaint, though. Weston should have mentioned that Francis Ford Coppola was going to be in the audience at the CSO, and that he still feels bad for the lack of response to the Megalopolis Suite. And let me tell you, David and Jessica, I did not know that Francis Ford Coppola was going to be there. And I did pull my punches a little bit. I did say that Megalopolis, not just Megalopolis, but Francis Ford Coppola films in general could be, I think the word I used was divisive.
A very diplomatic turn of phrase.
There's a non-zero chance that Francis Ford Coppola did indeed hear me say that. And I hope he is, he supported the diplomacy rather than blackballing me forever. But either way, it was a great concert. I loved the music. David says, while I do have an uneducated ear, I didn't care for the saxophone in that music, and the lack of response from the rest of the audience seems to show global agreement. Did I care for it? And I would say, well, you know, I am on brand. I do love strange instruments in orchestra. There are even stranger ones that could have been in there. I did mention at the end of my talk at the CSO, the saxophone is not in the standard orchestral setup. But the reason for that is not really because of any particular quality of the instrument itself. It was the result of multiple, I believe, Paris-based instrument makers who were highly competitive at the time, literally getting together and signing contracts with composers, organizations, threatening people over putting saxophone into the orchestra for purely self-motivated reasons. And as a result, I do think that, we are now trained to hear the saxophone as being kind of a strange addition to the orchestra, even though there are examples of it going back almost to the very beginning. Famously in the opera, I believe, isn't saxophone in Werther? Yeah.
There's during the right around the aria of the Tears aria.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a big saxophone solo that is like, what
Where
are
did
you
that
doing
come
here?
from? I will say the Megalopolis suite is a little bit different from the film score as a whole. And one of the things they did not include was the jazz organ, which is in the original film score, with the Leslie speakers, the wah sort of sound to it. And I was kind of hoping that would make it into the final suite, and that would have definitely overshadowed the saxophone.
A stylophone, maybe.
All I'm saying is if I was writing the music for Megalopolis, it would have been weirder. But thank you so much to David and to Jessica and to the whole family for coming over and listening to the podcast. We love getting new listeners. And hey, if you're listening and you have friends who are into opera or classical music and they don't listen yet, you can always go and just say, hey, listen to this podcast. We would certainly appreciate it if everyone listening was able to get one or two people on board.
Chalk Talk on Opera Box Score.
We have a new Chalk Talk for you. It's been a while since we've done a Chalk Talk. Really, we are going off the rails with just me and Matt here in charge. There was an article that came out last week, maybe 2 weeks ago at this point, in the New York Times.
The great opera tradition died with Puccini.
Yes, a provocative quote.
We're not begging the question here, certainly.
Before that article, the internet collectively roasted Peter Gelb for saying that after Puccini, everything was downhill for opera as well. So there's something in the air. Zachary Wolf and Peter Gelb are agreeing on something. It's apparently that Puccini was a peak. So Matt and I were interested in the question of, is there truth to that? Was Puccini truly the greatest of all time and we're all just in his shadow now? And if not, why does everyone still love his operas so much despite other great composers coming after him? We are here to get to the bottom of it once and for all. So without further ado, Matt, what is your take?
So I think that in a shocking twist, there is more to Zachary Wolf's thesis in this article than just what's in the headline. And it more has to do with the idea that Puccini was the end of opera being central to culture in the same sort of way. And that a lot of the reason why he became so prominent and is so central, to the repertoire more has to do with the global historical sociocultural factors, and he was a very talented craftsman who was just kind of in the right place at the right time.
I think that really sums it up really well. Puccini is one of those composers who, love him or hate him, was definitely a right place, right time composer. I think certainly in the U.S., Puccini's star really rose a lot thanks to some advantageous championing by institutions like the Metropolitan Opera itself. When Peter Gelb made the comments about how Puccini was this great composer, I think it was really leaving out the fact that the Met had a pretty major hand in that, at least here in America. Championing new works was really something the Met was just kind of doing at the time. And that sort of fell off after World War I, or right before World War I, rather, thanks to the ostracization of various German artists, because there was, a sense that, German artists were kind of persona non grata because they might be enemies of the state, right?
Yeah, the more things change, the more they stay the same, right?
I know, exactly. And I think this is an era of history which I think a lot of people forget about, and I think it's so important for understanding what happened to opera over the last century, because at the Met you have the sort of the Italian school of listeners and the German school of listeners. In the early days of the Met's history, the Germans were a little bit more, if not in charge, they certainly were more influential. And the Germans were more interested in newer music, stranger music. But once the war started and the Germans were out, literally banned from performing without loyalty oaths being signed and things like that, the sort of Italian, much more traditional sort of mindset really took over, and the Met ceased to be a house that really did new operas with any consistency, at least for decades.
Yeah.
And the Met, for better or for worse, is sort of the beating heart of what American opera was seen as for the better part of a century.
Especially when there were not very many regional opera houses back then. Like the version of regional opera that you got was the Met going on tour to these cities and bringing a Dog and Pony show around. And that division that you talk about between Italian and German opera, like that certainly wasn't exclusive to the Met. I think still today, honestly, there's a little bit of a stereotype of German opera being more cerebral. It's more complicated. It's more adventurous. It's more dissonant. It's less melodic. It's more, it takes more work to understand it, and therefore you are a better listener than someone who likes these pretty melodies and fancy high notes that you're going to get from Italian opera. And that is like a gross oversimplification. But it is also based in like the fact that German opera was much more influenced by symphonic music and like is more, for a long time was more harmonically and structurally adventurous, with like Wagner kind of being the driving force between breaking down the difference between aria and recitative, and that became a really important part of opera for every composer who came after him, even the Italian ones. Like even his exact contemporary, they were born the same year, Wagner and Verdi, like right around the time Wagner is starting to move into this, when you think about the fact that like the middle period Verdi, Rigoletto, Traviata, Trovatore, like those were happening around the same time as your Tannhäusers and Lohengrins, and those operas really don't sound the same at all. But like who moved towards whom as their careers went on? Like Verdi became less and less structural and more like through composed, just kind of freeform drama instead of this like highly regimented aria, two-part aria format.
The Wagnerian factor here is really important to consider because Wagner set a precedent for, I forget who said it, but it might have been Nietzsche or something. I can't remember. Someone said that Wagner was the beginning of modernism, because breaking those forms down past the point for a lot of people of no return. But, when you develop out of that, of course, the people who like felt like Wagner was the peak of German art were going to imitate, the Germans were going to imitate the German, right? So there is a cultural component there in addition to I'm not saying that, being more cerebral or more just emotional or traditional is necessarily better in terms of taste, but it was a very distinctive, a hard line that was drawn for a lot of people in the early 20th century.
Which was also around the same time that the Met was founded. Like the Met was founded in the 1880s. At that time, like Wagnerism was at its peak, arguably, like in terms of influence. And so all of these Italian composers are trying to figure out like what is making him so successful and are more and more moving towards that style of music. Verdi's retiring, and so like there's a little bit of a vacuum in terms of like the granddaddy of Italian opera. And so what I think is like special about Puccini is that he manages to take the best parts of late Verdi, that soaring romanticism, that focus on relationships, and like heightened emotionality, and then blend it with this kind of free-flowing music can do whatever you want it to, as long as you make it make sense with its own internal logic.
Straight out of Wagner.
And so when you like add this Italian tunefulness and like hard on your sleeve sentimentality replaces this like very, very cerebral kind of at times ponderous, monologuing about, the great gods of nature, like you get this fusion of the best of both worlds.
And that's one of the things that I do really like about Puccini. I mean, I don't I'm not playing up my weird obsessions with weird music too much on this show, but I do occasionally like to listen to something more #normal. But there is something that really is combining the best of both worlds at the right time when there was that power vacuum. And another factor that really worked in Puccini's favor too, that I think people will also sometimes neglect, is the advent of recording technology almost exactly at the height of Puccini's career. I want to talk a little bit about Enrico Caruso.
Please. We can always talk about Enrico Caruso. I just talked about him on my Pavarotti segment a couple of weeks ago for Thanksgiving because
we can talk about him every day. The Enrico Caruso show. Caruso was, obviously, he
was a sensation, just like a global sensation.
The first, best-selling records were all from him. And that did two things in my mind that are relevant, at least to this discussion. The first was, his singing style, which became sort of the default way to sing for much of the 20th century, moving the, everything in his chest voice, even the really, really high notes, for example.
Which he wasn't the first to do that, but it
was definitely a style that he was known for. And it almost overnight, at least within a couple decades, killed the previous kind of tenor, which could go into the head voice a lot more and really didn't start to come back until the Baroque revival, if then even. He changed the way opera was sung, and it was a style that was appropriate for, and indeed,
best suited to,
stamped of approval by Puccini himself. Like, they were aware of each other. I believe, Puccini, I think it was Tosca, wanted was going between two tenors, Caruso and someone else, for premiering Tosca in the US, I think. And he went with the other tenor, but then he came and actually heard Caruso sing and was like, yeah, I should have gone with Caruso. Yeah. Caruso was better.
And to tie all those threads together, then Caruso does end up premiering Fanciulla del West, the opera that was commissioned by the Metropolitan Opera for Puccini.
Yeah. And you start to have, because Caruso's voice was recorded, that became a standard. So people were not just singing more like Caruso, they wanted to sing the rep that Caruso was singing, which was a lot of Italian opera, a lot of Puccini specifically. And this was also at the time the Met was making a sensation by broadcasting their operas over the radio. So it became the standard. Simply because Puccini happened to be popular, Caruso happened to be mega popular, and the advent of recordings cemented this idea of what opera was supposed to sound like to so many people who could never even go into an opera house, who had never been to a regional company before because there wasn't one close to them. And Puccini was on the cusp of that revolution, not because he was, catering to it specifically, but because he was simply there. And because he had lovely melodies too, those came through really nice on a 78 gramophone recording, unlike, say, early Strauss opera, which would be just a mess.
A garbled mess, yeah, there's that, very straightforward trumpet-like tone of his music that, the gramophone was able to capture. And if you zoom out from what was happening in just the music world, we're talking about the run-up to World War I. And then Puccini's career continued after World War I as well. He died in the early 1920s. And so on top of all of this, very intense, artistic rivalry development kind of stuff, you're also looking at one of the most destabilizing events to ever happen in human history.
Yep. And
so coming out of World War I, there is this really intense nostalgia for a simpler time when things made more sense.
Yeah.
And there you kind of get this dual reaction to it where classical music becomes much, much, much more cerebral, much more experimental, much more geared towards the academy rather than the audience.
The academy and me.
And Weston. The academy. And the people don't they're not wanting to look at this chaos directly in the face in the same way that the Second Viennese School wanted to shove the fact that the world has lost all meaning, so it may as well lose its tonal center too.
Yeah.
And so then you get this calcification of like the taste of the public and a nostalgia for a time when it felt like the world made sense.
It's true. And to say nothing of the fact, too, that a lot of what would have been great composers were killed during World War II, whether in war or in concentration camps. And I will also say, too, that at least here in the U.S., I think there was also a little bit of anti-high art propaganda because it came from the Germans at that point prior to World War II. People like you'll see some like film reels, talking about how terrible the Nazis are, and you hear Wagner, right? So which
Hitler famously loved.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's not created out of
it's not from nowhere. But
you're telling me that the Nazi dictator who loved the opera with a long monologue about how great German people were could be used for propaganda?
I'm saying that unlike Operation Paperclip and early NASA, the U.S. did not have as much invested in the idea of restoring avant-garde music and operatic traditions to the U.S. soil. So there was a more vested effort in more old-fashioned stuff, and there became the split, and that split got worse as popular music grew, and because it was cheaper to produce, and you could fit it on shorter records.
And talking about it as old-fashioned, I think, kind of belies the ability of Puccini as a craftsman, and what he was able to do that was new and innovative at the time, which to me really comes down to just like the emotionality of the music and just like the pure naked sentimentality of it, paired with very simple, straightforward texts and plots about ordinary people living human lives and feeling human feelings, that really lets the music of it do the heavy lifting, and also creates really striking like stage pictures. Like we can all picture Tosca lying on the ground singing Visitate. We can all picture Butterfly looking off at the horizon. We can all picture Mimi and Rodolfo huddled around a candle. Like, these are indelible images in opera, not just because of PR and advertising campaigns, but because they're moments that speak to people and spoke to people then and have continued to, since it feels real. It feels relatable. It's not about ancient gods. It's not about invading armies like Aida. It's not about like a king going to a masked ball. It's not about like 17 different mistaken identities that lead you like through a romping farce where then someone gets thrown into a vat of boiling oil. Like, these are just like, I think that the fact that these are just people for the most part, like, adds another layer to that nostalgia of like, this could be someone I know, sort of.
Yeah. It's much more relatability proof, right? Because, in a lot of ways, the sort of German, Wagnerian ideal is not about being relatable. It's about big ideas.
It's about being the best.
This is an allegory for
it's about being the most.
The German state and anarchism and like, politics and like spirituality, and he wants to make you think. And, whereas Puccini is like, these are people that you know people like this.
Yeah.
And there's something really powerful there. Like, I am not a person who would say that, if Puccini had not been born at the right place in the right time, we would have never heard of him. But we absolutely would have. We wouldn't have, La Boheme being played every single year at every other company in the United States. But like, we would
still... They gotta make ends meet somehow.
We would still be hearing about him. We would still hear his music. I think for me, the thing that I always found appealing about Puccini, even from a really early age, was the gorgeous orchestrations, you would have a lot of great German orchestration, in the time period, right before, right after, and during, but like, to do that and have a hummable melody as well, like, it's not easy.
Right. Wagner is like, is one of the big proponents of this, like, the orchestra as a character. The orchestra has a voice.
Yeah.
As opposed to just being like a rum-ti-tum, papa. Those are like the things that people describe like bel canto operas or Verdi accompaniments from his early period. Like, he made the orchestra mean something. And
Yeah.
I think that Puccini not only made it mean something, like he uses it to create like a sense of place and an atmosphere.
There's a lot of really gorgeous stuff in there. I think, he does suffer a little bit from being overplayed, at least for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I will still go back and listen to favorite recordings. As a matter of fact, I didn't want to end this on a negative note, a super anti-Puccini note. So I did ask Matt before we started recording, what's your favorite moment in a Puccini opera? To see if we can kind of bring it back a little bit.
So my favorite Puccini opera, on balance, I think is Tosca, because first of all, I think it is like one of the best paced operas of all time. I think that that's another reason why Puccini operas like are very much in the public consciousness today. And,
way easier to sit through than the Ring Cycle sometimes.
And like the way the act breaks work, like it's 40 minutes and a break and 40 minutes and a break and 40 minutes and then you go home. That's an attention span that, like, for the most part, I mean, give TikTok another couple of years, but for now, people can like.
Well, the U.S. government is not doing that. So.
Yeah. And the fact that there's this like really free flowing feeling to the music that we've talked about so far. So you don't have these like very rigid formal structures where you're like, oh, and now I have to sit and listen for them to repeat this section again and add ornaments, which I, as a music lover, deeply love. But I understand why, for people who are going there for like the whole dramatic and an emotional experience, can kind of take them out of the moment to feel like you have a checklist of rules that you have to follow before you can move on to the next part. And the way that it can kind of lurch from one feeling to another, I think is really typified and exemplified in the moments of Act 2 of Tosca where she comes up to Scarpi at the Castel Sant'Angelo, and he has Cavaradossi, her lover, in an interrogation in the other room, and you can hear the sounds of that coming through, and they are squaring off. This is the part right before Visi d'Arte, leading up to it, where he starts trying to grill Tosca about what is it that she knows, because he knows that she will crack and give him what he wants. And this is all music that a lot of it is themes that you've heard before in the opera already or will hear again. Like you can hear kind of the beginning of some of the phrases of Visi d'Arte that show up in this moment of her kind of bemoaning her fate and not knowing what to do. And it is a moment that when you've got a great Tosca, like you can just absolutely sink your teeth into these like 2 minutes of music. Let's hear a little bit of a clip from Leontine Price and Cornell McNeil and Franco Corelli doing this at the Metropolitan Opera with Kurt Adler conducting.
Roberti,
Leontine Price, an opera box score.
Matt picked a clip from Leontine Price. I'm not even sure if this is the first time I've played this clip on the show, to be perfectly honest. But I do think that there's something about Puccini where when you listen to it, it sounds very spontaneous. It sounds it sounds like it's evolving naturally. And when you look at the page, that is not it at all. Every single moment is very carefully planned. And the way that, not just the way that like the orchestra writing happens, but the way that the orchestra interacts with the voices, like when it is a counter melody versus when it's just like accompaniment versus when it's doubling you. And that kind of like feeling of sonic tidal wave, like can almost create a somatic experience. It like you feel the music in your body. And so I picked this recording because I think that comes through even better in live performances than it does in studio recordings, where you have as many tries as you want to get it perfectly right. Like this is them in the moment, like following the roadmap that with a ton of detail about when to push and pull and what notes should be stressed and what should be unstressed. Like he gives you all the tools. Maria Callas talked about that a lot in her interviews about just like it's all in the score. And that I do think is what that I do think is the kind of the kernel that makes these operas feel timeless, is because it gives you a chance to express big feelings and show a lot of sentiment, but in skilled and practiced hands. It never devolves into like over the top sentimentality, except in the way that like you want that sort of like
right
that you want the permission to feel those same kind of big feelings.
My favorite moment in a Puccini opera, or my favorite opera, I think, from Puccini in general, you know, what I like about Puccini is the cheese. You know, I like the kitsch, you know, unfortunately, like in terms of like the more exotic qualities of Puccini opera have not aged very well. Turandot, Madama Butterfly, you know, a little bit of appropriation of East Asian cultures in a sometimes uncomfortable way for modern audiences. But luckily, I'm an American, and that means I can enjoy a spaghetti western if I want to, and I do. I love Fanciulla del West.
It's a great show.
It is not...
Andrew Lloyd Webber loves it too.
That's an actionable statement, Matt. You better be careful. It is a great opera. I really enjoy it. It is not very typical of Puccini in a lot of ways. It's a lot more grand, a lot more harmonically adventurous, perhaps, than a lot of his other pieces. But there's so many moments I like. I'm just gonna like pull out a chunk from the finale. We've already talked about Puccini so much. I don't want to take up any more time, but like, it's really pretty. It's so fun. This is from the recording from the 50s with Renata Tebaldi and Mario Del Monaco.
Great Puccinians, both of them.
Yeah. Conducted by Franco Capuana. It's got the chorus in there. It is all the cheese on my spaghetti, and I genuinely love it.
This just in, the 2-minute drill.
All right, listen up. Here's everything you need to know about what happened in Operaland this week.
Notre Dame has reopened after years of renovations following the devastating fire of 2019. The ceremony was a highly musical affair featuring the likes of Nadine Sierra, who was tapped to sing the French national anthem for some reason. Pretty Yende and friend of the show Benjamin Bernheim also joined the likes of Yo-Yo Ma, Lang Lang, Renaud Capuçon, and possible future friend of the show, comment dit-on, Faré Guillaume?
Epi. The Royal Ballet and Opera and the Met are joining forces to expand their respective cinematic offerings. The RBO, formerly ROH, will be able to broadcast the Met in more theaters in the UK, starting with the New York company's Barber of Seville in June. Quote, "We're absolutely delighted to be working with the Metropolitan Opera to improve access to some of the world's best ballet and opera," said RBO CEO Alex Beard. This first-of-its-kind partnership will unlock audiences on both sides of the Atlantic, so even more people can enjoy performances from our world-class companies in their own hometowns.
In another financial blow to the Bayreuth Festspiele, the festival announced that it would be cutting productions from its upcoming 150th anniversary season. The company blamed rising labor costs and inability to increase revenue for the decision. Planned productions of Tannhäuser, Lohengrin, Tristan und Isolde, and Die Meistersinger von Nürnberg have all been cut, leaving only Rienzi and the Ring Cycle intact. That's very reassuring news for all you Rienzi heads out there.
The Hollywood Foreign Press Association has decided to publicly humiliate Oliver Camacho by nominating Angelina Jolie for the Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Motion Picture-Drama for her portrayal of Maria Callas. This is the only nomination Pablo Larraín's film has received.
In major awards news, Italian soprano Irene Celle has won the China-based Concorso Internazionale di Canto Giacomo Puccini prize. That name sounds familiar for some reason. On the other side of the Pacific, San Francisco Opera head of properties Lori Harrison was awarded the company's eponymous medal for her 32 years of service.
In trade news, Yuval Sharon is stepping down as artistic director of The Industry, the groundbreaking LA opera company he launched to prominence in 2012. Executive Director Tim Griffin will take on the role of Artistic Director, with the remaining co-artistic directors Ash Fury and Malik Gaines forming a new Artistic Advisory Council.
Riccardo Frizza will take over as Artistic Director of the Donizetti Opera Festival, where he has served as music director for the last 8 years. Quote, "Those who, like me, have known and been studying his scores for a lifetime are aware that this authentic reservoir of music must be transformed into artistic projects equal to the stature of such a treasure. I will soon unveil my project," said Frizza. That is not a threat, it's a promise.
And on this day, December 9th, it is the first performance of Handel's opera Floridante in London, which opened in 1721. In 1836, Mikhail Glinka's opera A Life for the Tsar premiered in St. Petersburg. In 1905, Richard Strauss's Zalebe had its premiere, scandalizing everyone.
For some birthdays, 1610 saw the birth of Italian castrato Baldassare Ferri in Perugia. Italian composer Pietro Guglielmi was born in Tuscany in 1728. English baritone George Grossmith, who created many of the roles in Gilbert and Sullivan operettas in London, was born in 1847. 3 years later, American soprano Emma Abbott was born in Chicago in 1850. Spanish composer Joaquin Turina was born in Seville in 1882. 1891 saw the birth of German soprano Kate Herwig in Berlin. Kate was a singer who created the role of Gita in Zemlinsky's Der Zwerg, one for Weston, since he had to talk about Puccini for so long.
It's like a reward.
Spanish mezzo-soprano Conchita Supervilla was born in 1895, and German soprano and noted Nazi Elisabeth Schwarzkopf was born in Germany in 1915. 1927 saw the birth of French creator of musique concrète, Pierre Henry in Paris.
Also for me.
American mezzo-soprano and longtime inspiration of Oliver Camacho, Tatiana Troyanos, was born in 1938. Happy birthday to Scottish countertenor Christopher Robson, born in Falkirk this day in 1953, as well as to English soprano Susan Bullock, was born in Cheshire in 1958.
And that's your 2-minute drill. Benjamin Bernheim, friend of the show, singing a bit of Ave Maria at the reopening of the Notre Dame Cathedral. You know, I've never been to a cathedral reopening after a fire, but Ave Maria, I believe I would have expected from the get-go.
I don't know what other option there is. Picking Nadine Sierra might seem a little bit counterintuitive, but it's not the first time that the French have asked an American soprano to fill in for a big cultural milestone. But unlike when Jesse Norman sang the Marseillaise at the opening of the 200th anniversary of the French Revolution, she did not have a gigantic gown dress festooned like the tricolor, which if you've never seen before, you should Google that image because it will stick with you for the rest of your life.
I do love how the French they don't have this sort of same attachment to like whoever has the national anthem has to be French, has to do this. If they like you, they like you. You know, that if you say anything else about the French, you know, I think this is kind of a really cool opening. Obviously, Notre Dame, major historic site. I'm glad to see it's back in business, baby. And Pharrell Williams and Nadine Sierra are probably now best friends. So
a pairing that I didn't know that I needed, but here we go.
Let's talk a little bit about Yuval Sharon stepping down because he's big time now, Matt.
He is. So the industry is what was an avant-garde company that he really launched onto the map in 2012. When
really cool company.
They produced this new opera by Anne LeBaron called Crescent City. And it was an experimental art space, and it really helped him make a name for himself. And so much of a name for himself that he's very in demand in New York and won't be able to dedicate the time in LA at the industry that an artistic director ideally can do, because he has a couple of very high profile directing gigs at the Met, such as its next Ring cycle for 2028. And next season, he's going to be not conducting, but I wouldn't put it past him. He's going to be directing a new production of Tristan and Isolde.
Well, I'm always so impressed with his ability to convince audiences to see something weird and like it, or at least like it enough to go back and try something else that's weird. And that's really what we need in opera right now.
Maybe he can get people to give money to Bayreuth.
I mean, this story really bums me out because we've talked about this. Every 6 months, there's a new thing that Bayreuth is cutting or complaining about, or because even Rienzi is a cost-cutting measure, or not a cost-cutting measure, something to bring people in. He was like, oh, this is something different because, you know, when your model is...
We only do the same 13 operas.
Yeah, it is tricky. Rienzi, I mean, we'll say maybe it'll be a huge hit for them, but...
When is Das Liebesverbot coming back?
This is a massive cut. They're cutting everything from this season except for the Ring cycle, which, I mean, I guess is not nothing. And Rienzi, and it really has me concerned because even a few months ago, they were talking about cutting the chorus, bringing a lot of them down to part-time. And it's really starting to make me nervous. About 55% of their funding comes from them themselves, which, you know, for Germany,
that has to be pretty high.
Yeah, exactly. I would imagine so. There's a lot going on in Germany right now on the local level, especially with arts funding getting cut for various reasons. A lot of it is the rise
of... An open letter, maybe?
Oh, we could do that. You know, the rise of, more austerity-minded folks who don't value the arts on a certain side of the political spectrum often, are not helping. And, this is such a unique festival and such an institution for their 150th anniversary to be struggling like this. Really, really has to sting.
I know next year they have to do Defane.
That'll bring in the kids. Let's wrap this show up.
Good call, bad call on Opera Box Score.
Good call, bad call. It's how we end the show every single week, in and out, without fail, unlike the Bayreuth budget. Matt Cummings, what do you have for me?
Okay, so I did go see Wicked since the last time I was on the show, and I loved it. I loved it so much. I thought Ariana Grande was so funny, and was really done dirty by whoever did the sound mixing, because they made her sound pretty bad at times. When I'm sure that the noise coming out of her mouth was really wonderful. But there's this general taste in movie musicals of this like super, really, really buffed, like super flattened, like overly bright sound that I just think makes most people sound washed out. And I've heard that the sounds a little bit better in IMAX, which I didn't go see, but like you shouldn't have to. Like the movie should sound good when you go to a regular theater too. And also, my bad call is to people who think that very straightforward foreshadowing is like a secret code that only they can crack. Like when one of the ads dropped for this a couple months ago, we've always been living in the Wicked Press Tour. Like I don't even remember life before the Wicked Press Tour. There was one ad that had the Miss Gulch theme over it, and the number of TikToks I saw where people were like, "Oh my god!" But when you figure out that that's the Wicked Witch of the West theme, like your whole life makes sense. And I was like, that is one of the most famous sound cues from any movie ever. If you didn't recognize that, I have serious concerns over your media literacy. Open the schools. So anyway, Wicked, good. People talking about Wicked, yikes.
That is it for this week's edition of America's Talk Radio Show about opera. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Get your voice heard and find links to stuff we've talked about at our website, operaboxscore.com. If you care to find us, look to the western skies. That's also where you can put your money where our mouths are. Give back to the OBS using the Support the Team tab. Your announcer is Norm Waddell, your creative consultant is Oliver Camacho, and your audio editor is me. The executive producer of the OBS is George Cedarquist. For co-host Matt Cummings with guest Key'mon Murrah, I'm Weston Williams, asking you to continue the conversation about opera an octave above everyone else. We're back with an all-new show next week, plus you get more opera headlines, more hot takes, and more Christmas cheer. Join us.